Welcome back to Fast Forward, a series of interviews that invites visionaries who truly care about employee experience and well-being to delve deeper into the future of work on the front line. From manufacturing and healthcare to retail and transportation, in each episode we'll be exploring how technology, automation and other trends are shaping the way over 2.7 billion people work on the front line. For today's guest, I'm very excited to welcome Bristel Minsker, Communications Director at the Filtration Group. Filtration Group are a global manufacturer of filtration consumables, and they're on a mission to make the world safer, healthier, and more productive by providing mission-critical filtration solutions that are designed to enable advanced healthcare capabilities, provide clean air, and drive productivity. Based out of Austin, Texas, Bristel's career spans well over a decade, having previously held communication roles at the American Red Cross, where she led public affairs and media relations for the Central and South Texas region. Now responsible for overseeing all aspects of corporate communications at Filtration Group, Bristel is leading the company's mission to ensure their 9,000 frontline employees around the world have an optimal employee experience. So welcome, Bristel. It's great to see you again.
Thanks. Good to see you too.
When we last spoke, we were discussing how quickly the world of internal communications is changing. Obviously, there's been rapid technological transformation to sort of enable that remote and hybrid working, which has sort of now become the norm. One major shift that I've personally noticed, and I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on this and whether you've experienced the same thing, is from the old mindset of internal communication, which was just very much more about we need as an organisation to inform employees. And that obviously got found out to be a little bit fragile in light of what played out with globally over the last few years. And that shift has moved more towards organisations who are doing internal comms well, considering the who, the what, why, when and how their organisation communicates to its employees. And I think it's become very apparent that for internal comms to truly work, nowadays, your employees really need to trust you first. And, ultimately what generates that trust is authentic communication based on genuine empathy. So, with all that said, what are your thoughts on empathy? And do you think there's enough empathy in the way organizations communicate with their frontline employees?
Well, I can't speak for every organization, but I can say, when you are any big organization is always going to be a struggle to kind of break down the feeling that we are some sort of like giant monolith trying to reach people on a human level. And instead, we are just, a group of humans trying to work together towards a common goal. We have found that your communications are a lot more successful when you can really make that authentic human connection between leaders of the organizations, who are usually the ones delivering any given message, and the teams that they are trying to lead. And then always making sure that we are staying grounded in our kind of shared mission, right? Like you mentioned, the how, the what, the why. Well, for us, that why is this mission to make a positive impact on the world, to make the world safer, healthier, and more productive. And so we try to loop everything back to that and then kind of build on that with a human connection and make sure that we're not only communicating, these absolutely kind of essentials, the organizational announcements, the HR benefits, those things are all important, but then layering into that things that provide a richer experience, and that it's a two-way communications as opposed to just leadership, the top, the center, however you want to describe it, down and out, but rather back and forth.
Yeah, no, that really resonated. I think definitely, humanizing. I think historically, internal comms wasn't necessarily given the respect and credit it should have been in the boardroom. And I think I read a report by Gallagher. Over 2/3 of internal communicators have, in 2020, felt that their impact has been much more noticeable at that sort of senior leadership level, and it's now being something that is increasingly being discussed and recognised as a real business critical area for organisations to address. And I think part of that transitional change has come initially through technology. So, let's throw a load of money at new technologies. and in particular for frontline, not really thought about them as individuals and their needs. And ultimately that has maybe meant that, from a technological standpoint, there's been a lot of investment, although clearly not as much as information workers, but really the human element has been now sort of forgotten about. And it's, a lot of automation, a lot of ways to just make it quicker to communicate rather than necessarily really thinking about what your employees need, and being able to sort of show that level of empathy through the communication. Very interesting. So just sort of leading on from that then, in terms of filtration groups specifically, you've got over 9,000 employees? Is that correct? Across 27 countries? What's the sort of breakdown? Is that 9,000 frontline, or is that a blend of both? Like, what's the...
I would say we're about half in the US, North America, half outside. And probably a little over half of that 9,000 headcount is frontline folks. So people who touch product or customer or talk to customers.
Okay, cool. I mean, it can't be easy managing the communication for so many employees across such a contrasting geographical spread of countries. And I guess even more challenging when it comes to trying to ensure your communication empathizes with such a diverse workforce. How do you go about trying to sort of practice empathy, through your own internal communications at the filtration?
Well, I think for us, we are highly decentralized. So, we have a very small footprint that is, quote unquote corporate, but rather we are a group of business units around the world that are led by, general managers, business presidents in those locations. And for us, providing those more local leaders who are closer to their teams with the right tools to be able to communicate is really important. I'm not going to be able to relate very well or put myself in the mindset of someone who is working on the front line in Germany or in Malaysia, but their local leader can, their local HR person can. And so making sure that we're staying well connected with those folks, but more importantly, empowering them with tools and support to communicate with their teams. And sometimes that's technology and sometimes it's not. So you have to kind of balance that. There's a lot of technological solutions that can get your message anywhere in the world really fast. But just making sure that it's the right message for that audience and that it's even a technology channel that the person wants to utilize, right? For example, there are a lot of mobile apps out there right now, and we've looked at a lot of them. But for a lot of reasons, that's maybe not the right solution for every team. And so you just have to kind of balance those things and really stay connected with the local teams rather than make an assumption that, I can push out some global message, sitting from my chair in Austin, Texas, which sometimes is required. And so you have to be really thoughtful about that. But balancing the two is important.
Yeah, no, that all makes perfect sense. I think, speaking to people like yourselves at, a lot of similar sort of companies with a predominant frontline workforce, it seems that where organizations are seeing most success, and by success, I mean, employee NPS scores improving, retention improving, and just a general happier place, workplace for employees. It's where they have genuinely taken an interest in what their frontline employees are thinking, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and then, through that learning and understanding, they've been able to develop a reputation for being caring, trustworthy, and supportive, which at a time like now, where obviously we're still healing from the pandemic, and a lot of countries definitely, in I guess in your territories outside of the US will be experiencing, austerity and a cost of living crisis. That's just so important, right? I think what you suggested there and what you're doing at Filtration Group is really, really interesting. As I briefly alluded to there and earlier, the global dynamics of business has changed quite drastically since COVID hit, and those powerful forces that we unfortunately have no control over have really reshaped the way we work and live. I mean, whether or not that's for the better or for the worse we're yet to see. But I guess from that, employees' expectations have really changed, and we're seeing employers like yourselves, I'm sure, a lot of the other employers in the manufacturing space in particular, really challenged, a lot more challenged than they were pre-pandemic, to create value, out of a much more redefined and redesigned employee experience. With that said, how did the pandemic change how the Filtration Group has perceived and ultimately, improved their frontline experience?
Yeah, the pandemic was, for anyone watching who works in manufacturing or any sort of essential, frontline role, was very different than, you're hearing about all these tech companies or a lot of businesses just went fully remote, right? And really never came fully back. But for us, obviously, when you're running a manufacturing business, and we're making an essential product, you can't just go remote, right? People need to be there. But you do have folks in support roles, in office roles that don't necessarily need to be there every day. So we actually had to strike the difficult balance of making sure that we were keeping teams safe by reducing the amount of people who were, in a building or on site at any given time, but also making sure that our frontline team felt appreciated and understood and that they were being respected. And it wasn't like everyone in the office gets to stay home all the time, but we have to show up and take more risks every day to make this product. So that was where that empathy really came into play. And frequent communication about our thought process, about the safety protocols that were in place was really, really important. And a lot of those things, I think, have endured, over 3 years now, is more frequent communication, open lines of communication, so that they don't feel, they feel like they're looped into decisions and that they have, that their voice is being heard. And then technology was so important during that pandemic period because you had to get information out to so many people so quickly. I mean, think about those early days when things were changing daily about what local rules and regulations were, what was the safety protocol that was being recommended that was changing all the time. So we had to communicate really, really fast. And so you do have to embrace new technologies that you weren't using before. And so I think that has, pushed people to have more of an open mind about trying new things and an open mind about being able to pivot when something's not working. You can try something. If it doesn't work, you pivot. Our CEO often says we want to focus on the things that we can control. And the pandemic and then, several, major global issues that we're facing today, right? You have war, you have economic uncertainty, you have bank closures, all sorts of things that we cannot control. So instead, focusing on the things that we can control and supporting our teams in the best way possible. And that has endured since the pandemic.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think being agile, which is, I guess, essentially what I'm reading through the lines there, and being agile with your comms and not taking, I guess, the more rigid approach as probably was more of the tradition before. Definitely seems like the best approach to be able to address what is an ever-changing sort of global landscape, but also an ever-changing workforce, right? I guess as of equal importance, right? Because things are happening every day in your employees' lives that require, an ear to the ground that you then also need to be mindful of when you are sort of communicating with them and having that agility and the ability to be agile so that you can adapt and you don't have to sort of waste a whole quarter, for example, taking the same approach because you don't have the capability to adapt. I think it's super important.
One thing I'll add to that is, one of the key tenets of our culture is entrepreneurial. So we want every team member to approach everything with an entrepreneurial mindset, almost like an owner's mindset. If this was my company, what decision would I make? And that was in place long before the pandemic and has continued after. And I think that was where, when you get into a tough situation, if all of your team members feel empowered with that entrepreneurial mindset, it allows for a much more agile kind of approach to all things. And ultimately, I think helps support the success of the business.
Yeah, I was reading your values on your website. I think they're great. And are you seeing that? Does that sort of resonate through sort of when it comes to your employee value proposition? Are you sort of seeing that sort of entrepreneurial value that you empower your workforce with really helps with sort of that, building that employee value proposition and strengthening your employee brand?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things that makes us really, appealing as an employer is knowing that someone can really make a difference, right? You're not just, a person, making a product on a plant floor. Like, you are a piece of something much bigger, and you have the ability to impact and influence everything around you. And that kind of entrepreneurial mindset we apply to everything. And I think that's really apparent, for somebody who's either interviewing with us, onboarding with us, or in their journey with us. Or that's something that we certainly strive to make clear and share examples of it. Back to this internal comms piece, it's like we want to share those stories so people can see it in action and kind of the results that it creates.
Yeah, I mean, recognition is so important, right? I mean, stemming from your early years as a baby, the recognition there right through, even as mature adults, we all need that recognition to meet those fundamental needs that, that we all have. And it seems like, your approach is something that other organizations could look to emulate as well. So we came into contact through, I was listening to a call. It was a sales call with, and you're obviously clearly a digital signage evangelist, and it really resonated with me how much value you place on the channels that you use to communicate with your employees. Going back to thinking much more about the who, how, what, when. So. You're clearly, as I say, an evangelist for digital signage, but sort of going deeper into that channel, what role do you think that screens have had in enabling you to, be more impactful with your internal comms, especially in terms of sort of being more agile and obviously weaving in that empathy, which is so important?
Yeah, we are very, I would say, early in our digital signage journey, right? Like, at this point, it's 2023. Every business has screens, right? Somewhere. I mean, there's maybe an exception to the rule somewhere in the world for Filtration Group, but for the most part, if you step into a factory or into a lobby, there's a flat screen there but in a lot of places, it's just playing a rotating list of PowerPoint slides, and that's okay. And I think that's a good phase one. Or it's connected to an ERP system and there's dashboards and people are kind of monitoring productivity, et cetera. Those are really compelling. Obviously, screens allow for, they make a big visual impact and they're very easy to change, right? Like, you're not having to print out a thing and post it on a wall. Although for a lot of people, the printed posters are still a great way to communicate to a frontline team member. But there is, just kind of a flexibility that you get from essentially the digital version of that, the timeliness with which you can replace it. Also, the fact that because we are so decentralized and global, there are very few ways. We don't even have a shared IT system for every one of our businesses. They are not on the same global HRIS, which is very rare for a business of our size. And so I bring that up because there are very few ways that I, as kind of this central point of internal comms, can push out important messages related to our mission, related to our culture, to help strengthen those things, and then communicate essential messages when necessary. to every single site. So I see digital signage as a good way to, answer for a lot of those things, but it's not complex in the same way that some other kind of technology solutions might be. And there is enough of a two-way engagement opportunity. You can put messages on digital signage that allow for, through the use of QR codes and other things, for a little bit of a two-way that prompt some action on the part of the person who's seeing that signage. So this is, my personal kind of theory on why digital signage is a direction that works really well for us, and the unique conditions that we're working with in our kind of global company.
Brilliant. I mean, it's definitely great to hear, how much impact it's beginning to have. And I think the most important thing when we consider generally internal communications with our employees is, first and foremost, putting yourself in their shoes, right? So if you're trying to communicate a piece of information, what is the best way for that information to have the best impact on the employee? And I think with digital signage, it's really understanding that as a communication medium, it can have a much better impact than some of the other channels you're using to share that piece of information. Now, obviously, the other channels have got amazing value and have a great use in that channel mix. So it's not a one or the other scenario, but it is very much a case of, as I say, really trying to understand, where are my employees when I want this information to land and resonate with them, and ultimately for them to probably take an action, if not immediately, subliminally over time, for them to sort of maybe change their approach or their mindset with something. So I think that's really the beauty of digital signage. And as you said, it's a journey, right? It's not, and I think this is the same for a lot of technologies. It's transformational, but transformation takes time. I think we've been using the word digital transformation for as long as I've been working in tech, for over 10 years. So, this digital transformation isn't going to happen overnight, and there's a maturity curve that you'll go through with your digital signage that will, not get you to where you want to be, in 5 years' time, in 3 months. So it's just being patient, and also, understanding that with technology comes change management within your workforce, right? If you're taking away a notice board, you need to understand that people will have to adapt their behavior to start using screens to acquire that same information. But yeah, all in all, really great that you are such an evangelist for digital signage. So I mean, that's all been really insightful, Bristel. I think one of the ways that we're rounding off each of these sessions is with the same question, which is, what do you predict or hope the future of work on the front line will look like in 2040?
Yeah, I took some time to think about that question. I mean, one thing that the last 3 years have taught us, certainly with the pandemic, is that it's really hard to predict anything, right? Nobody would have predicted some of the challenges that we've faced in kind of the workplace, over everything that happened over the last several years. So I can't say that I predict that I can make any accurate predictions. What I will say is, what I hope for is just more of what we talked about, right? Like, we've seen in all parts of our professional and personal lives, the boundaries and the kind of very clear divide between personal and professional has slowly dissipated over time with the use of social media, with the way that we all live our lives now, with the fact that we're also connected on our phones at all times. I mean, I certainly don't only work from 9 to 5, right? I'm checking emails at all hours. And so sometimes and there's lots of pros and there's lots of cons to that, but I hope that we will embrace one of the advantages of that, which is really allowing that sort of human side to seep into the workplace and creating a place where everyone feels like they belong. They make an impact. Their voice is heard in the workplace in the same way that it's heard in other parts of their life. So I think that's kind of what I hope for. And I think that's the direction that we are going.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it sounds utopian, but the reality is that should be every organization's, mission, to make those employee experiences as equitable for everyone as possible. I think, in particular for the frontline, I think that I read something from Microsoft recently where the new currency on the frontline is a currency of caring. And I think a lot can be said about really showing true empathy, really sort of listening to your employees and allowing them to be much more involved in influencing and informing how you communicate and ultimately how you build those employee experiences, which, as you say, are much more entwined with our sort of personal lives and well-being. So hopefully more organisations can take a leaf out of your book, Bristel. Brilliant. Well, thanks a lot for your time, and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks so much. This has been fun.
Brilliant.